Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we take vast, complex topics and distill them down to the essential, fascinating facts you need to know.
Today, we are immersing ourselves in one of the most critical and complex bodies of water on Earth, Lake Victoria.
And this deep dive feels so necessary because Lake Victoria isn't just a big blue spot on a map of Africa.
No, not at all. It's really a story of hyper-evolutionary speed, colonial policy disasters, astonishing ecological collapse, and, surprisingly remarkable resilience.
And all of that is contained within this one massive, geologically young depression in the African continent.
It's quite a story.
We've assembled material focusing on Lake Victoria's immense scale, its unique ecology, and we have to talk about the legendary cichlid superflock
Oh, absolutely.
and the severe modern challenges it faces, from invasive species and systemic pollution to, well, highly controversial water management.
Our mission today is to quickly gain a comprehensive understanding of this vital, complex, and frankly, deeply troubled body of water.
We want to get past the basic geography.
Exactly. We want to understand the why behind its current state, how its geological youth made it so vulnerable, how its biology made it spectacular, and then how human actions triggered this rapid, cascading environmental failure.
Okay, so to set the stage, let's start with the wow factor. The sheer scale of this lake. I think most people know it's big, but they might not realize how big it is on a global scale.
The magnitude is truly staggering. It really does put it in an elite category worldwide.
So what's the headline fact?
First and foremost, it is recognized as the world's largest tropical lake, period. But then when you look at all freshwater lakes by surface area, only one is bigger.
And that's Lake Superior, right?
That's it. Lake Superior, between the United States and Canada, Lake Victoria is number 2.
That puts its, nearly 60,000 square kilometers into perspective?
59,947 to be precise.
That's a surface area roughly the size of the entire Republic of Ireland.
Or the state of West Virginia, yeah.
It's massive.
Precisely. And while it's enormous in an area, holding about 2,400 cubic kilometers of water, which makes it the world's 9th largest by volume. Its importance is just magnified exponentially by its political geography.
Right. Because that huge size means it doesn't just belong to one country. It straddles 3 major nations.
And that creates this incredibly intricate set of shared responsibilities and, of course, potential conflicts.
So who are the stakeholders?
The lake area is shared by 3 East African countries. Tanzania holds the biggest share at 49%.
Why?
Uganda has 45%. And then Kenya has the smallest slice at just 6%.
And that political division means that any problem pollution, fishing rights, water levels, it's not just a technical issue.
It's an international negotiation. It adds this tremendous layer of complexity to every single challenge the lake faces. I mean, when a resource is shared like that, accountability can become, it can become very diffuse.
Okay, we've established the scale. Let's zoom out now and look at the history, starting with how the outside world, particularly Europe, first came to know about this body of water.
The modern name we all use, that comes from the explorer John Hanning speak.
Right. In 1858, he named it after Queen Victoria.
He did. And that historical naming is important to note, but you have to understand it in the context of the time.
It was an imperial act.
It was an imperial designation. It basically superseded the multiple local names that already existed, names that had been in use for centuries.
And what were some of those deeply rooted indigenous names?
They're fascinating. They reflect the geography and the culture of the people living around it. In Swahili, it was often called Ikarewe.
Okay.
In Uganda, the name Nalubaale was used, which translates to something like the home of the spirits.
Wow.
The Luo people called it Namlowe, meaning great water, and the general term Nyanza in Kinyarwanda just means lake or water source.
It shows you how central it was to so many cultures long before any European explorers arrived.
Absolutely. It helps you appreciate the scale of that local connection.
That's a wonderful contrast. But speaking of history, the geological history of Lake Victoria is, for me, the first big aha moment in our sources.
It is.
We tend to think of these enormous lakes as being ancient, but this one is, geologically speaking, a newborn.
It is surprisingly young. We date its current iteration to only about 400,000 years old.
That's nothing in geological time.
Nothing. And that youth is absolutely central to understanding its vulnerability and its dynamic, unstable past.
And the way it was formed is just. It's a story of massive, slow-motion planetary violence, the Great Rift Valley, How did the rift actually create this basin?
The creation of Lake Victoria is a beautiful, classic demonstration of plate tectonics and drainage reversal.
Okay, break that down for us.
The lake was formed when a huge, fractured block of the Earth's crust, which sits between the two main branches of the East African Rift System, tilted.
It's like a giant seesaw made of rock.
That's a great way to put it. Specifically, the western edge of this block was uplifted. It was pushed up.
Okay.
This tilting caused a major downwarping or depression in the middle of the block. And crucially, this raised the western side of the whole area much higher than the east.
And that changed everything.
It fundamentally reversed the existing drainage patterns.
A reversal of flow. That's hard to wrap your head around.
Yeah.
Where did the water used to go before this massive geological plumbing change?
So we're talking about the Miocene era. Before the lake was even there, the whole catchment area used to drain outwards.
Outwards.
Yeah. Rivers and streams on the western side of what is now the basin flowed west into the Congo River Basin and eventually emptied into the Atlantic Ocean.
And the other side?
The streams on the eastern side flowed east toward the Indian Ocean.
So the rising walls of the Albertine Rift, that's the western branch of the Great Rift, it basically acted like a dam.
Exactly. It blocked that outflow and forced all that water to start accumulating inward, creating the Victoria Basin itself.
And that instability didn't just stop once the lake formed, did it?
Yeah.
The geological cores they've pulled from the lake bed tell a really alarming story.
They paint a fascinating and, frankly, a terrifying picture of volatility.
How so?
Since its formation 400,000 years ago, those cores show that Lake Victoria has dried up completely at least 3 times.
Completely, like, gone.
Vanished. These complete drying cycles are strongly linked to past global ice ages, which caused huge, prolonged reductions in rainfall across the whole of East Africa.
So a body of water big enough to be shared by 3 modern nations just disappeared.
Yeah.
Left a dry plain. That must have been utterly catastrophic for any life there.
It was, and the last time that happened wasn't in some distant, deep past. It was only about 17,300 years ago.
That's recent.
Very recent. It stayed dry or severely contracted until it began refilling about 14,700 years ago, which coincides with the start of the African humid period.
And that instability, that knowledge that the whole system can just turn off and on, that has to be the foundational context for its biology, right?
It is. It's the key. Any life living there has to be constantly prepared to adapt or die.
Okay, so let's move to its hydrology, how the water works. Despite its huge volume, there's a curious paradox in the lake's water balance.
There is.
Our sources say a massive 80% of its water input actually comes from direct rainfall hitting that vast surface area.
Which is a critical factor. It makes the lake extremely vulnerable to regional climate shifts. But the paradox lies in the high rate of loss. The average evaporation rate is substantial.
How much are we talking?
Between 2 and 2.2 meters per year. That evaporation is almost double the local precipitation rate in the areas right around the lake.
So it's in a constant battle with the sun in the air.
It is. It's hugely dependent on that continuous heavy rainfall over the entire surface to stop itself from shrinking.
And if that rainfall falters, as it does during drought cycles,
the lake level can drop very, very quickly. That sheer surface area exposed to the sun means enormous evaporative stress.
And of course, its most famous contribution to global geography is the Nile River.
Lake Victoria is fundamental to the world's longest river system. It's the principal source of the longest branch of the Nile.
The one that exits near Jinja in Uganda.
Right, as the Victoria Nile. It provides an immense volume of water to the system that flows north all the way to the Mediterranean.
But the ultimate source of the entire Nile system is technically upstream of the lake, isn't it?
That's a great distinction to make, and yes, while Victoria provides the main outflow, the ultimate source of the entire Nile basin is actually considered to be one of the tributary rivers of the Kagera River.
Which is the biggest river flowing into Victoria.
Exactly, and the Kagera's headwaters originate even further away, deep in the mountains of Rwanda or Burundi. So the system is just vast, beginning far from the massive reservoir of Victoria itself.
Okay, so finally for this section, let's look at its structure, its bathymetry. It's famous for its area, but how deep is it?
And this point is absolutely critical to understanding the lake's ecological fragility.
Why is that?
Despite its enormous surface area, Lake Victoria is a shallow giant. It sits in a depression, a downwarped area, not like its geological neighbors, like Tanganyika, which sits in a deep, narrow Rift Valley trench.
So what's the average depth?
Only about 40 meters, or 130 feet.
Just 40 meters on average. That is incredibly shallow for a lake of this size.
The maximum recorded depth is only 80 to 81 meters, about 265 feet. For context, Lake Tanganyika is over 1,400 meters deep.
A completely different world.
And our source material notes that the deepest part in Victoria is offset to the east, near the Kenyan sector.
So why is that shallow profile so important when we start talking about pollution later on?
It all comes down to limnology, the study of inland waters. Deep lakes, like Tanganyika, they usually have what's called stable thermal stratification.
Meaning layers of water at different temperatures that don't mix.
Exactly. The top layer is warm and full of oxygen, and the bottom layer is cold and often anoxic with no oxygen. And those layers rarely mix.
But because Victoria is so shallow,
it lacks that stable stratification. It heats up quickly, and it's much more prone to rapid mixing.
I see where this is going.
So when you introduce massive nutrient loads, which we'll get to, you get huge algal blooms. They die, they sink.
And the bacteria that break them down use up all the oxygen.
All of it. And because the lake is shallow, this deoxygenation can affect the entire water column much more easily and rapidly than in a deep lake. It spreads pollution and low oxygen levels throughout the entire body of water very, very quickly.
So that shallow profile is basically the geological precursor to its modern environmental crisis.
It set the stage perfectly.
Wow. Okay, that geological instability and the lake's shallow vulnerability are the perfect setup for the biology we're about to discuss.
It is. Lake Victoria is an ecological powerhouse. It supports not just its famous fish, but rich terrestrial life as well.
Like what? What lives around the lake?
Yeah. Well, the basin is home to diverse megafauna that are closely tied to the water and its wetlands. Of course, you have significant populations of hippos.
Right.
Then there are these specialized creatures like the African clawless otter and the spotted-necked otter, both highly adapted to fishing in these waters.
And what about the unique mammals that live in the marshy areas around the edge?
The Sitatunga is a marvelous example. It's a specialized marsh-dwelling antelope.
Oh, I've seen pictures of those. They have incredible hooves.
They do. They're splayed hooves that let it walk across dense vegetation and swampy ground. You also find the giant otter shrew and the bohor reedbuck in that landscape.
And the reptiles are just as impressive, I imagine, particularly the apex predator of the lake.
Absolutely. There are large, healthy populations of Nile crocodiles in the lake and its tributaries.
And turtles.
In terms of turtles, you find African helmeted turtles, variable mud turtles, but the real highlight of the native turtle fauna is the Williams mud turtle.
Why is that one particularly significant?
Because it's endemic, it is restricted specifically to Lake Victoria and the other associated lakes and rivers within the Upper Nile Basin.
So it's found nowhere else on Earth?
Nowhere else. Its existence just reinforces this idea that this is a unique regional biological zone. It demonstrates how isolation can foster unique life.
Okay, let's move to the most famous residents, the fish, and specifically the cichlids.
Yes.
If Lake Victoria is a biological laboratory, then the haplochromine cichlids are the greatest experiment ever run. The speed and scale of their evolution here is, well, it's almost unprecedented.
It is scientifically recognized as one of the most stunning examples of explosive, rapid speciation found anywhere on Earth. We are talking about the haplochromine cichlids, or Haplochromos sensuato.
We have to give the numbers their due because they are just staggering. They define the lake's biological heritage.
They really are. Before the recent collapse, scientists had identified over 500 species of these haplochromine cichlids within Lake Victoria.
500.
And nearly every single one of them was endemic, found nowhere else on the planet.
And that's not even the end of it, is it?
No, the scale of the diversity is still unfolding. Researchers estimate there may be another 300 more species yet to be formally described. We were potentially looking at 800 species, all derived from a single ancestral lineage.
500 to 800 species. And this happened in a time frame of less than 15,000 years since the lake last refilled.
That is evolutionary warp speed.
Unbelievable.
It's the definition of rapid adaptive radiation. The material notes that the speed and the sheer diversity of these fish have been subjects of intense scientific scrutiny. The question is, how can a single lineage diversify so fast?
Right, that's the crux of it. If the lake is geologically young and has dried out repeatedly, where did the genetic firepower come from to pull off this evolutionary explosion in such a short time?
This is where the theory of the evolutionary reservoir comes in. It connects the whole Great Lakes complex.
So it wasn't just Victoria.
The Victoria haplochromines are part of an older, broader group of over 700 closely related species found across the region in smaller lakes like Kyoga, Edward George, Albert, and crucially, Lake Kivu.
And Lake Kivu is deeper, part of the Congo River drainage, so it likely would have maintained more stable populations during those drought cycles.
Precisely. The theory suggests that Lake Kivu acted as a crucial evolutionary reservoir, or a refugium.
A safe house.
A safe house. When Lake Victoria dried out completely during those ice ages, the haplochromine stock found refuge in these deeper, more stable neighboring lakes. This preserved a large pool of genetic diversity.
And then when Victoria refilled 14,700 years ago,
that stock was able to recolonize the empty ecological space and just diversify explosively.
So the refilling of the lake created this vast, empty canvas, and the stored genetic diversity allowed life to fill every conceivable niche incredibly quickly.
And that specialization is what truly made the ecosystem so robust. It wasn't just different colors, it was extreme functional diversity. The haplochromines fall into at least 16 distinct ecological groups based on their diet and behavior.
16 groups.
They were the engine of the lake's self-regulation.
Okay, let's delve into what that functional diversity actually looked like. What did these 16 groups do?
They optimized the use of every single resource. For instance, you had detritivores.
What do they do?
They focused on grazing, decaying organic matter on the lake bottom. Their removal, as we'll discuss later, was catastrophic because they were the lake's natural cleanup crew.
The janitors of the lake.
Basically, yes. Then you had others like planktivores, insectivores, and melisivores.
Let's talk about the melisivores.
Yeah.
How specialized did they get?
Unbelievably so. They evolved these powerful, crushing pharyngeal jaws. These are secondary jaws located way back in the throat that specialize solely in crushing the shells of snails and small mollusks.
So their mouths literally evolved into little nutcrackers.
Perfect for a single specific job. This diet allowed them to process a food source that was inaccessible to most other fish, and in doing so, they controlled potential parasite hosts, like the snails that carry schistosomes.
Wow.
Then you had the piscivores, which ate other fish, and insectivores, hunting larval insects. And perhaps most remarkable were the zooplanktivores.
The ones that eat plankton.
Right, but they evolved different densities of gill rakers. These are the structures used for filter feeding, to capture different sizes of zooplankton in the water column. This minimized competition.
So one species might target tiny copepods, while another one is built to catch slightly larger water fleas.
You've got it. It sounds like an incredibly complex, finely tuned machine where every single species had a highly specific job that contributed to the overall health and balance of the lake.
It was a system built on niche partitioning. And in a young, shallow, turbulent lake, there was another driver of speciation, right?
Sexual selection, a huge driver. Females of many cichlid species prefer males with very distinct coloration. Because the water was initially clear, this visual signaling was highly effective.
So a small group could get isolated somewhere.
By a new rock outcrop, a slightly different stream inlet, anything.
Yeah.
And they could rapidly fix unique color preferences. This leads to reproductive isolation, and boom, you have a new species in just a few hundred generations.
That's the mechanism. Female choice, driving reproductive isolation faster than geography alone.
It demonstrates the power of these behavioral and ecological feedback loops in driving evolutionary change, especially when you start with a rich genetic reservoir and a vast, empty ecological space.
Okay, now let's look at the human relationship with this ecosystem before the disaster. Pre-invasion, what did the fisheries look like?
Before the mass extinction event, the haplochromines altogether accounted for an estimated 90% of the native fish biomass.
90%.
But, and this is key to understanding the policy failures, not all were viewed equally.
The colonial era introduced a specific hierarchy of value to the fish.
Yes. A really important survey was done in 1927-1928 by a scientist named Michael Graham. He established that the native Singida tilapia, or engij as it was known, was the single most important food fish.
And why was that?
It was highly prized locally for its excellent flesh quality, its convenient size for trade and eating, and it was abundant in the shallow areas.
And what did Graham note even back then?
He noted that even in the late 1920s, with really primitive fishing techniques, basically just simple flax gill nets imported by Europeans' localized overfishing, was already causing a drop in the sunfish numbers close to the established markets.
So that was the first warning sign of human pressure on the preferred commercial species.
The very first. But the smaller haplochromines, which, remember, constituted 90% of the biomass and were crucial to the food web,
They were functionally ignored by the authorities.
systematically dismissed. They were regarded as trash fish by the colonial administration and many of the new commercial interests.
And that fundamental misunderstanding, viewing 90% of the life in the lake as insignificant, that's what opened the door for what came next.
It provided the intellectual justification for policymakers who wanted to improve the lake by introducing a large, commercially valuable predator. They completely failed to grasp that the so-called trash fish were the key ecological players.
The ones doing all the work.
The ones consuming detritus, controlling mollusks, and providing the primary food source for the larger, commercially favored tilapia they claimed to care about.
That colonial policy failure leads us directly into the environmental crisis, which, as you mentioned, is often cited globally as the most dramatic example of human-caused extinctions within a single ecosystem.
The scale of the loss is horrifying, and it's largely because of the sheer lack of knowledge about what was being destroyed.
What are the numbers?
Estimates are conservative, but at least 200 species of haplochromine cichlids, that's about 40% of the total known superflock, are considered extinct.
And that's just the ones we knew about.
That's the tragedy. That includes over 100 species that were never even formally cataloged or described by science. We extinguished unique life forms before we even knew they existed.
Let's break down the two primary interlocking threats that caused this catastrophic collapse, starting with the most infamous one.
The invasive predator, the Nile perch.
Tell us about this fish.
The Nile perch, Lates niloticus, is a giant, aggressive apex predator. It is capable of reaching up to 2 meters in length and weighing over 200 kilograms.
A monster.
An absolute monster. And the idea of introducing it was first proposed way back in the 1920s.
With what justification?
The intent was to convert the large population of trash fish, the haplochromines, into a single, commercially exploitable, large-bodied fish.
And people raised warnings immediately, didn't they?
They did. Even in the 20s and 30s, there were explicit, strong warnings against this plan. Scientists knew that introducing such a large non-native predator would be an existential danger to the native species.
Including the commercially important native tilapia, the fringe.
Yes. But those warnings were ultimately overridden by the drive for short-term economic gain, and again, that dismissal of the smaller cichlids as ecologically irrelevant.
So walk us through the actual timeline of the introductions in the 1950s and 60s.
The process began regionally. The Nile perch was first introduced upstream of Murchison Falls in 1954, right after the Owen Falls Dam was completed in Uganda. This allowed it to quickly spread into the adjacent Lake Kyoga.
But getting the perch into Lake Victoria itself is a bit murky, isn't it? The sources suggest a lack of clear documentation.
This is a critical historical point. By the late 1950s, Nile perch start appearing in Lake Victoria. Officially, there is a lack of indisputable evidence for those initial 1950s introductions into Victoria itself.
What is the official line?
Officials from the Uganda Game and Fisheries Department denied involvement. They suggested the fish must have spread naturally by passing through the Owen Falls Dam when the gates were shut for maintenance.
Which scientifically sounds a bit convenient.
It was widely viewed as implausible. Circumstantial evidence, including testimony from local African staff who worked for the department, strongly suggests the fish were introduced intentionally under the directive of senior colonial officials in 1954-55.
So they basically ignored the warnings to create a new commercial fishery.
That's what the evidence points to. And regardless of how the first ones got in, more were deliberately transferred in 1962-63 just to make sure the stock became established.
And what was the ecological consequence of unleashing this monster into a stable, enclosed evolutionary cradle?
It was a slow-motion catastrophe that gained momentum very rapidly. Initially, the perch population was low, but by the early 1980s, it just exploded. It achieved a drastic peak.
And the results?
Immediate and devastating. The haplochromines were decimated, particularly the groups that lived in open water and had nowhere to hide. The piscivorous, the melliferous, the insectivorous groups, they were hit the hardest.
And this didn't just change the ecology, did it? It triggered a fundamental change in the human economy around the lake.
It completely flipped the entire socioeconomic structure. Pre-1970s, the fishery was all about small-scale, local subsistence fishing for native species.
Right.
Suddenly, the Nile perch created a massive, commercially exportable product. Large filleting factories sprang up all along the shores, processing perch for export to Europe and North America.
So millions of local subsistence fishermen lost their native fish, only to be replaced by a massive, centralized industrial export economy focused solely on the invasive predator.
That is the tragic trade-off. Today, the fishery is composed almost entirely of this invasive complex. Nile perch accounts for 60% of catches.
50%.
The non-native Nile tilapia makes up 7%, and the only major native survivor is the small Lake Victoria sardine, which accounts for about 30%.
And the native ange, once the pride of the lake.
Functionally absent in commercial catches. Gone.
So threat number 1 was an invasive predator. Threat number 2 is a systemic collapse related to eutrophication and pollution, which connects directly back to the loss of the cichlids.
This is the cascading failure. This is where it all links up.
Explain it for us.
The lake is naturally low in dissolved nutrients. Its fertility depended entirely on the rate at which nutrients tied up in dead matter were quickly returned to the water.
And the haplochromines, especially those hundreds of species of detritivores,
They played the crucial role of internal recycling. They were the lake's metabolic engine.
and when the Nile perch ate them all, the engine stopped.
Exactly. When the detritivores vanished, detritus dead plants, fish waste, algae, it all began settling on the shallow bottom instead of being eaten and recycled.
So it just piled up.
Piled up and began to decompose slowly, consuming oxygen and essentially starving the lake's deeper waters of dissolved oxygen. The consequence was the increasing frequency of massive algal blooms,
Which, when they died, just made the problem worse.
a positive feedback loop of destruction. Mass fish kills, more decomposition, less oxygen.
That explains the internal breakdown, but what fueled the blooms to begin with? Where did this catastrophic nutrient inflow, the eutrophication, come from?
It's a combination of factors, but one really dominates: human waste.
So pollution.
Yes, we see increased nutrient inflows from rivers carrying agricultural runoff and industrial waste. But the most significant and immediate contributor is the urban population explosion around the basin.
The massive urban centers ringing the Lake Kampala in Uganda, Mwanza in Tanzania, Kisumu in Kenya.
These cities, with populations swelling so rapidly, are discharging vast amounts of untreated raw sewage and domestic waste directly into the lake and its influent rivers.
And that sewage is rich in nitrogen and phosphorus.
The perfect fuel for those devastating algal blooms, especially toxic cyanobacteria. The sheer volume of raw sewage means the lake is receiving this constant high-load dose of nutrients.
All because of a lack of adequate modern sewage treatment facilities.
For many of these major population centers, yes. The pollution just finds its way into the shallow, vulnerable water unimpeded. This is eutrophication on a continental scale, and it's accelerating the loss of habitat for any surviving native fish.
And here's the strange, almost unbelievable counterpoint to all this. Despite massive problems with water extraction, which we'll get to, the lake has recently seen a contradictory trend. The source material notes that between 2010 and 2022, the lake's surface area actually increased by a significant 15%.
Which caused massive flooding.
Right.
How does that happen?
This is where climate variability compounds human failure. This increase is fueled by periods of extreme weather and much higher rainfall, likely linked to climate change.
So while the water quality remains toxic and deoxygenated, the physical level is rising.
And causing disastrous flooding in lakeside communities, submerging infrastructure, agricultural lands, and impacting human settlements that had adapted to the previously lower levels. The lake is both collapsing internally and swelling externally at the same time.
So we have the Nile perch destroying the food web and raw sewage fueling massive algal blooms and deoxygenation. Now we layer on the third major issue, the water hyacinth invasion.
Which is the visible symptom of the pollution.
The water hyacinth, Icornia crassipes, is a beautiful plant, but it thrives specifically on the high nitrogen and phosphorus levels provided by the very pollution we just discussed.
It's basically eating the sewage.
In a way, yes. It colonized the lake rapidly, reaching its peak biomass, forming these massive, thick, impenetrable mats in 1997.
And where did these mats cause the most trouble?
They concentrated in the relatively protected areas, sheltered bays, and northern parts of the lake near those urban centers like Kampala. And the consequences were multifaceted and devastating.
Let's list the major impacts of this dense plant covering.
Okay, firstly, the ecology. The dense mats block all sunlight and prevent oxygen exchange with the atmosphere. This creates severe anoxic conditions, a total depletion of oxygen in the water beneath them.
Which kills off even more fish.
Right. It compounds the decomposition problem and raises disease levels for both aquatic life and for humans.
And the practical economic consequences.
They were immediate. The mats blocked navigation for local fishing boats, ferries, larger transport vessels. It crippled trade.
It choked everything off.
It impeded access to the shoreline for people and animals, and it significantly interfered with hydroelectric power generation by clogging the water intakes at the dams. It was a physical and biological chokehold on the lake.
And yet, amidst all this destruction, the source material points out a surprising, almost paradoxical positive effect of the hyacinth in certain areas.
This is the incredible nuance of nature finding a way. The dense water hyacinth mats created a natural, impenetrable barrier to fishermen.
Oh, I see. They couldn't get their nets in.
Exactly. By rendering large areas inaccessible to commercial fishing and heavy netting, these mats provided protective, unfished areas. Functionally, they became involuntary conservation zones.
And this allowed some fish populations to rebound.
Yes, including the surprising reappearance of some haplochromine species that had previously been classified as extinct.
So the invasive plant, fueled by pollution, inadvertently provided a protective cloak against the pervasive threat of overfishing.
It offered a temporary reprieve for some genetically crucial populations.
How were management efforts able to deal with this massive, rapidly growing plant? It sounds impossible.
Management evolved quickly after some initial failures. Attempts at manual removal were they were useless. The plant's regrowth rate vastly exceeded the removal speed.
So they had to get smarter.
The focus quickly shifted to biological control, which turned out to be a highly successful tactic.
What kind of biological control agents did they introduce?
They introduced 2 different species of water hyacinth weevils,
Weevils.
Neochatina brucei and Neochatina eichhornia. These are natural insect predators of the plant, and they were highly effective. They chew holes in the leaves and stems, which reduces the plant's buoyancy and causes it to sink, and it also curbs the growth rate.
So a combination of biological warfare and mechanical removal.
Exactly. The weevils were supplemented by large harvesting and chopping boats used to clear the key navigation channels. This combined effort, plus some natural fluctuations, like the powerful El Niño weather patterns in 97-98, which created high winds that physically broke up the maps, led to a significant decline in the infestation by the early 2000s.
And the material notes a truly modern application for the plant itself, turning the disaster into a resource.
Which is an ingenious solution. All that harvested hyacinth material is no longer just waste. In Kisumu County, in Kenya, a green power plant was built in 2013 specifically to use the harvested plants for biogas production.
And what's the byproduct?
The sludge that's left over can then be used as fertilizer. So you're creating a circular economy that mitigates pollution and provides sustainable energy.
That's a really hopeful sign of resilience. And even after facing this triple threat, the predator, the pollution, the hyacinth, some haplochromine survived. How did they manage to persist through that ecological gauntlet?
This just showcases the incredible genetic potential and adaptability of this evolutionary superflock. They survived in several key ways, using both geography and biology.
Let's start with geography, the refugia, the hiding places.
First, they found safety in specific geographical refugia. Some populations survived in nearby small satellite lakes that were geographically isolated from the main body of Lake Victoria, and thus never got the Nile perch.
And what about within the main lake itself? Where were those protective zones?
They primarily hid in 2 places, deep among rocky outcrops, which are physically too complex for the large, streamlined Nile perch to navigate and hunt in effectively.
Right, they can't get in there.
Or in the dense, tangled root systems of the papyrus sedges and other vegetation along the lake edges. These provided shallow, structurally complex havens where they could avoid the big predator.
And the second survival mechanism is even more incredible: rapid biological adaptation to the polluted environment.
This is the most stunning confirmation of their evolutionary speed. Scientists have documented clear, rapid evolutionary responses to these human-induced pressures.
Like what? How did their bodies change to deal with the low oxygen?
They developed larger gill areas. They simply needed more surface area to efficiently extract the scarce dissolved oxygen from the water. This let them survive in conditions that would kill the Nile perch or the non-adapted cichlid species.
And since the water was getting murky and turbid from the pollution, their senses must have adapted too.
They did. They showed changes to their eyes, adapting for better sight in the increasingly turbid, polluted water. This involved changes to lens structures to maximize light capture in cloudy conditions.
And there was one more adaptation, wasn't there? For speed.
Yes, some survivors adapted their body shapes, developing a smaller head and a larger caudal peduncle, which is the muscular part of the body leading to the tail fin.
Which allows for
faster acceleration and swimming speed, presumably to better evade the Nile perch when they had to venture out for food.
So evolution wasn't paused by the disaster. It simply sped up, selecting ruthlessly for those few individuals that had the genetic variation needed to cope with pollution and predation at the same time.
It was survival under extreme anthropogenic pressure. But we have to remember, this success is limited. For some critically threatened species, the only surviving members are now in captive insurance populations in zoos and aquaria around the world.
So a few species are, sadly, extinct in the wild.
Surviving only through the intervention of conservationists in these captive environments.
Let's pivot now to the human history of controlling and utilizing this giant water body, starting back with those 19th century explorers. This part of the story centers on one of history's great geographical feuds.
It does. We return to that very public quarrel between John Henning Speke and Richard Francis Burton.
Right. Speke's 1858 claim that he had sighted the lake and found the true source of the Nile and named it Victoria was met with intense skepticism and, well, fury.
Burton, who was forced to wait further south in Tabora because he was ill, was absolutely convinced Speke had jumped the gun and lacked the conclusive proof for such a monumental claim.
He was livid, wasn't he?
Livid. Speke had seen the southern shore, but he hadn't circumnavigated the lake or verified the northern outflow. Burton regarded the source of the Nile as completely unsettled. He believed Speke's claim was based more on ambition than proof.
And this feud became public and poisonous, escalating the debate within the Royal Geographical Society.
And driving the need for even more expeditions to get definitive confirmation. Even David Livingstone got caught up in the confusion, attempting to find the source but pushing too far west and mistakenly entering the Congo River system.
The confusion persisted for years.
It wasn't until the 1870s that the question was definitively settled by the British-American journalist and explorer Henry Morton Stanley.
The famous Dr. Livingstone, I presume, expedition.
Well, a later one, funded by the New York Herald. He confirmed Speke's claim by successfully circumnavigating the entire lake and unequivocally reporting that great, powerful outflow at the Ripon Falls on the northern shore.
Confirmation secured. But moving into the 20th century, the focus shifts dramatically from finding the source to actively controlling it. And this brings us to the dam controversy and the concept of the agreed curve.
This is a critical point in the lake's history. It really showcases the political power dynamic of the colonial era.
Why have it?
The only natural outflow of Lake Victoria, the thing that formed the Victoria Nile, was over a natural rock weir near Jinja, Uganda.
A natural dam.
Yes. But in 1952, engineers working for the colonial government of Uganda blasted out that natural weir.
Why destroy a natural feature?
The intention was twofold: to control the lake level more precisely, and, most importantly, to facilitate hydroelectric power generation downstream. To regulate the water release, they established an operational standard known as the agreed curve.
Explain the agreed curve. What was its function and who agreed to it?
The agreed curve was a legally binding international standard. It was established by the then colonial power, the UK and Egypt, which obviously had a major vested interest in the Nile flow.
And what did it do?
Its primary function was to regulate the amount of water released from the new barrage to ensure that the artificial flow mimicked the natural flow of the old removed rock weir. It set a maximum flow rate that was dependent on the current lake level.
So the higher the lake, the more flow is allowed.
Exactly. It was designed to maintain the natural hydrological cycle despite the presence of the dam.
But this meticulously designed agreement ultimately led to a severe crisis in the 2000s.
It did. The crisis escalated significantly after 2002 when Uganda completed a second hydroelectric complex right next to the first one, the Kira hydroelectric power station. The combined demand for water to turn both sets of turbines just increased exponentially.
And what was the immediate result by 2006?
By 2006, the cumulative effect of that increased extraction was devastating. The water levels in Lake Victoria hit an 80-year low.
And this caused severe, immediate consequences for all three countries.
Everything was impacted. Shorelines receded dramatically, crippling docks and ports that were suddenly miles from the water. Water intakes for municipal drinking supplies and industrial use were left high and dry.
And it exposed vast areas of sediment.
Impacting fishing and local agriculture, yes.
An independent analysis pointed the finger directly at Uganda's operation of the dams.
Yes. An independent hydrologist based in Nairobi did the analysis and calculated that Uganda was, in fact, releasing about twice the allowed amount of water stipulated under the terms of the agreed curve.
Twice the legal limit.
This excessive, unregulated outflow was unequivocally cited as the primary cause of the severe drop in the lake's level. It just highlights the immense political risk when a shared, vital resource is managed unilaterally in pursuit of national energy goals.
And finally, we have to acknowledge the immense human cost associated with transport on the lake. It's a vital link, but the tragedy has been profound.
It's a critical transport artery, connecting the economies of the three nations. Lake Victoria ferries, like the MV Uhuru and MV Umoja train ferries, have been vital for moving cargo and people since the 1900s.
But the severity of maritime disasters on this lake just underscores the fragile infrastructure and safety issues in the region.
It does.
Two specific events stand out due to the sheer loss of life.
Tragically, yes. The sinking of the MV Bukoba in 1996 resulted in the loss of between 800 and 1,000 lives. It's one of Africa's worst maritime disasters.
And the cause was?
Severe overcrowding and a lack of safety regulations were often cited as the primary factors. And then more recently, in 2018, the sinking of the passenger ferry MV Nile caused over 200 deaths. This continuous toll just highlights the inherent dangers of massive lake transport, often made worse by capacity issues and sudden, severe weather changes.
And the material even notes a more recent aviation tragedy, with a commercial passenger plane crashing while approaching Bukoba Airport in 2022, resulting in 19 fatalities. The lake is just central to human movement, economy, livelihood, and, unfortunately, profound tragedy in the region.
So if we synthesize everything we've learned today, Lake Victoria presents this deep, deep paradox.
It does.
On one hand, it's a geologically young depression, only 400,000 years old, that has dried up completely multiple times, confirming its deep instability.
Yet until recently, it was this unparalleled evolutionary cradle,
generating a hyperfast superflock of over 500 endemic cichlid species in just a few thousand years. I mean, that's just explosive biological power.
And then, in the span of less than a century, that evolutionary cradle was severely compromised through a cascading environmental failure.
A failure we engineered.
The introduction of the Nile perch removed the lake's cleanup crew. That allowed raw sewage from massive urban centers to fuel catastrophic eutrophication, which led to the invasion of the water hyacinth.
And the extinction of hundreds of species. The triple threat caused an extinction event of immense magnitude. What gives us genuine hope, however, is the remarkable resilience and biological adaptation we observed in the surviving populations.
The fish that managed to persist.
The ones in the small, rocky refugia hidden in papyrus swamps, or the ones that quickly adapted larger gills and changed eye structures, they represent a priceless genetic reservoir. They have proven they can evolve and respond to catastrophe faster than any scientist predicted.
This entire deep dive shows us that Lake Victoria isn't a static environment at all. It is a constantly dynamic system,
It is.
responding rapidly and violently to both deep geological forces and these immediate, acute human pressures, from colonial policy to modern energy demands.
Which brings us to our final provocative thought for you to explore. We know these cichlid species rebounded and rapidly respeciated once the lake refilled about 14,700 years ago, based on the genetic stock preserved in those satellite reservoirs. Now that we have critically threatened species that are only surviving in captive insurance populations, and given the incredible speed these fish can speciate, what role might conscious human management play in the next geological cycle of Lake Victoria's evolution? If we can stabilize the pollution and control the perch, is the mission merely preservation of the few remaining species? Or is the inherent genetic wealth of the haplochromine so potent that we could eventually participate in or even catalyze a new process of re-speciation fueled by these carefully protected genetic lines?
A question that connects conservation biology directly to rapid future evolution and challenges us to think about human influence not just as destructive, but as a potential steward of future life. Something truly profound to mull over until our next deep dive.